Today, for the next session, we have Mr. Saransh with us. I would ask Professor Jyoti Sarup to please felicitate Mr. Saransh Vajpayee. Mr. Saransh Vajpayee is a distinguished climate change expert currently serving as the Associate Director for the Climate Change Program at World Resources Institute, WRI, India. His work focuses on climate action at state and local levels, advocating for innovative and practical solutions to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Mr. Bajpai holds a master's degree in development and environmental management from Indian Institute of Forest Management, Bhopal, and a bachelor's degree in electronics and communication engineering for JP Institute of Information Technology, University, Noida. Prior to his current role, he was instrumental in revising Madhya Pradesh State Action Plan on climate change, aligning it with emerging climate priorities. His earlier tenure at Department of Environment, Government of Madhya Pradesh provided him with a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities in climate action. With over a decade of experience, Mr. Bajpai has made significant contribution to the field of climate science, policy and implementation. His dedication towards advancing climate action and his ability to translate complex scientific concepts into actionable policies have made him a respected figure in the field. I would now invite Mr. Saransh Bajpai to the podium to address the gathering.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Is it audible? Is this working? Oh, okay. No, I don't think so. I mean, this. So I am very delighted to be here. I would like to thank Dr. Swaroop and Dr. Mehrotra for having me here. It's always a pleasure to speak before young talent, emerging talent, and talking about some of the things which are very relevant in the contemporary times and which are required, by the policymakers. So academic exercises are very important. Without them, you cannot come up with a good analysis. But how to translate that analysis, how to capitalize, make it relevant for the practitioners, for the policymakers, so that you can achieve that real impact is, what is required by the industry, by the government in the current times. So, can I have the presentation, please? Till now, I have been informed that all of you are made aware of the science of climate change, how it impacts the urban areas, how urban areas contribute to the impacts of climate change, what is adaptation all about in the urban context, what is mitigation all about. So I know that I won't have to apprise and inform you about that, but I'll take a step ahead, and my presentation would cover a practical study which has been implemented in a lot of cities and how it has been beneficial to the local stakeholders, as well as what are some of the challenges or those pain points which need to be kept in mind and how to overcome them. So the topic on which I'll be speaking today is assessing the mitigation potential of urban areas in India, a data-driven approach in a data-scarce environment. Now we all understand that having data at the national level is quite easy. There are a lot of, apart from government, I would say non-state actors who hold a lot of data, who carry out these primary surveys, and they have rich quality data. But having the same at a local scale or at the subnational level becomes a bit difficult. That is why a lot of modeling exercises which are done at the global level, Sir has talked about IPCC and its assessments, they are at the regional scale. Now bringing it to the national scale is a challenge. Now further, bringing it at a state level or a region in a country level, that again is a challenge. So downscaling and all those things is the mantra. But then with downscaling, you lose a lot of, essence. So what are the implications for a bottom-up analysis is what I would be covering in my intervention today. This is basically we did a study. We started with a study which was a part of an implementation, and the insights which we got from this study, we documented it in the form of a working paper which was launched some time back. And we are putting this exercise to use in all the city level work which we are doing as an institute. So all right, so there are some facts, some data which is presented on this slide, but all the sessions which have happened till now, I think you all must be appreciating the fact that all the evidence on climate change which has been presented till now, it establishes the fact that the battle against climate change, if at all it has to be won, urban areas play a very important role. And why is it so? Because cities globally account for more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is bound to increase in the future. Why? Because 50% of India's population is likely to live in urban areas. And when that will happen, there will be a huge demand for energy. In the context of Indian cities, there will be a huge demand of energy from the cooling perspective. Because we are a tropical country, we have these impacts of heat waves and heat related stress. So there's a dire need to start planning for climate action from the context of this rising and projected rising GHG emissions. At the same time, climate action at a local level, it's largely ad hoc. Can anybody explain or give an example of this? Why do I say that climate action, whatever action is happening at the city level, it's ad hoc? Maybe an example from the e-bus deployment.
For example, from my campus only, we are installing the permeable paving, but they are first concretizing the surface, and then for the surface only they are putting the permeable paving. But the purpose was to increase the surface, decrease the surface runoff, and increase the permeable space. But that purpose is not solved. So it is ad hoc.
So here, no, I understand, I appreciate it. So here the issue is not about ad hoc nature of why this permeable surface is being developed at the first instance. There is an issue with the implementation. What I am saying is कि if climate action in cities is happening, that particular thinking is only ad hoc.
I think because we need energy for growth, and any climate action that we take might decrease or charge the energy that we require. So it becomes a major compromise when we talk about climate change requirements than the economic growth that we require.
Right. Anyone else?
Actually, we have not conducted enough studies for the implementation of various schemes. We just started with the idea without understanding the ground reality.
Correct.
And the thing which we use bottom-up approach.
Correct.
So we don't have a grassroots level of planning and requirement. So that's
Right.
why they appears to be
Right. Right. So what he's saying is that, for example, the e-bus program. So the cities are now, because there is a competition which has been created, a call for bids which is there, call for demands so that demand can be aggregated, which is happening at the national level. All the cities are now, based on their economies and their requirements, they are submitting their requirements that we would require 40 e-buses, someone was saying 200 e-buses, etc. But is that based on any planning? Has some data assessment happened? Has some needs assessment happened? Or when you are deploying e-buses, as madam was saying, that what will be the implications on energy use, energy demand? Because the grid is still coal-based, right? So if you are basically what is happening, you are substituting from one fuel to the other. Of course, there will be some reduction in emissions. Tailpipe emissions will also go down, air pollution and all those things would be curtailed in the cities, but then where is the power coming from? So has these kind of assessments happened or not? And that is why it is very necessary to transform from this ad hoc planning to a data-based planning, data and analysis-based planning. Now, the study which we did, there were two components. One was at the national level, one was at the local level. I'll be talking mostly about the local level because that is more, that will be more interesting and in the context of the program. So the idea was to use city scale data and modeling to set emission reduction targets for the cities in the future scenarios and prioritize mitigation actions. Now what happens is there can be a long bucket list of mitigation actions which anyone can think of. Okay, I want to promote e-buses, I want to install rooftop solar, I want to install ground mounted solar PV or rooftop solar or anything else for my water pumping, etc. There can be a lot of measures, but which ones are applicable to your city, which ones will make will have a more impact. So that is where these data-based analysis and setting of future targets based on future scenarios comes in. And this entire exercise was highly consultation driven. It was not a desk exercise. Validations and vetting was a part and parcel of the entire process, which then informed the city level climate action planning. So this is the process which we had adopted. We did this analysis for 4 cities. As you can see, they are very varying in their nature. One is Mumbai, a metropolitan, huge population. There's a floating population as well, high GDP growth rate, a decent level of per capita incomes. Then there's Indore, which has currently low income today, but it is having a higher rate of GDP growth as compared to population growth. So, that is one city. Ujjain, a very small city as far as population is concerned, but has a huge floating population because of the pilgrimage tourism. So we picked these cities. Again, there was an analysis which happened. I'll show it in my next slide. The idea was classifying the cities based on current income. When I said Indore, it is low in income today, but projected economic and population growth, what will be that? So there were some parameters. These were some of the parameters based on which we decided the cities. For data, there's a climate smart cities assessment framework which Government of India has developed. The 3rd round has happened. Every smart city has to participate in that, and now it is being extended to other non-smart cities as well. it basically has 5 thematic areas: energy, transport, water, waste, biodiversity and urban green cover, etc. And then there are indicators in each of these thematic areas based on which cities have to submit their data to the Government of India, and then there is some ranking which is done for each of these cities. So we got hold of this data, as well as we got primary data from the local city authorities as well as parastatal organizations for the purpose of our study. And then there are some tools which are available. The pathways model by C40, we were able to use this only in Mumbai because Mumbai is a C40 city, and pathways is restricted in that way that only those city authorities can use pathways tool which are a signatory to C40. But for the other 3 cities, we used the World Bank's CURP tool. Again, there are limitations with these tools, which I'll be talking about towards the end of my presentation. And finally, based on the scenarios which came out of these tools and models, we proposed certain climate action strategies for each of these sectors. So this was the criteria for selecting the cities. I'm just showing the case of Indore for the purpose of my intervention today, because showing for each city would take a longer period of time. For this analysis, we looked at the current incomes of the city, the future incomes, the GDP growth rate, the current GDP, the future GDP growth rate, and the population growth rate. And based on this, and the point where the axes intersect, that is the national average. So 1.26 and 4.84. X-axis is the income, and y-axis is the proportion of income growth relative to population growth. So Indore, right now, it's an emerging city. This is the classification which we did. We did this for around 14-15 odd cities. Again, why 14-15 odd cities from a list of 4,000 plus cities and towns? Because this is also a data intensive exercise. You do not have GDP figures at the city level available for every city. It's very difficult to get that. So in an emerging city is which has a low income today, but there is a high income growth relative to population growth. That means the economy is economic activity in the city, which is leading to the economy surpassing the population growth. And when we look at this particular decade where Indore is progressing, I think this is the PDF. Anyways, so that there's a transition in this. This green dot in the 2030, it moves somewhere where this Indore 2030 is written. That means that Indore in this particular decade or the decade after will move from the emerging cities category to the stabilizing cities category. What will happen is that because of the current high income growth relative to population growth, it will become a high income country, high income city in the future. So somewhere over here. So basically, Indore will become a high income city because of this factor. And when incomes rise, there is a tendency to move towards equilibrium. So Indore will have a low income growth relative to population. That proportion will gradually keep on reducing. So it will become a stabilizing city. Now what does this mean? This means that if an emerging city today, which is witnessing a high economic growth, so it will invest in infrastructure, right? What policymakers need to ensure that they do not build an infrastructure which locks in carbon. The technology should be such that it doesn't, make the city enter into that perpetual cycle of emissions, right? So the technology choice has to be optimized so that when it moves to a high income city, it is able to say that my economic growth has not led to emission growth. So For other cities also similar analysis was done, based on which we selected the cities, and this was also an important criteria to come up with recommendations of which city needs to do what. Some cities, are there was also a case that there is a thriving city which became an emerging city. Now all this is based on the observed data. So in that case, there are again similar recommendations to Indore, but also preserving the current infrastructure, etc. Those are the recommendations. Now, based on the criteria used for selecting the cities, for Indore again, we through data collection and data assessment, we came up with this figure, with this graph, where the emissions are currently and where they will be. This is again, projection is based on CAGR. We have a past 10-year greenhouse gas inventory record for Indore. Based on the CAGR, we have projected for future. Now, this is a business as usual emission scenario, that if no new policies come up, no new actions are taken, whatever has been happening in the past decade, that goes on, how will the emissions look like in the coming next 2-3 decades? So what we can see is that there will be a 1.5 times increase in the emissions in the business as usual scenario. Now this is huge. If you look at these figures, they are tons of CO2 equivalent per year, right? When we did this on a per capita basis, we saw that it will be more than 2.8 to 2.9 tons of CO2 equivalent per capita per year, which is way above India's average. Of course, anybody can say that for a city like Indore, this is fine. But then this is our challenge, that we have to reduce the emissions. How can that be done? And if we look at the breakup of these emissions, so the largest category is manufacturing and construction energy. Again, city by city, this would change. This breakup would change depending on the economic activity. But if you see in Indore, and overall if you see, these two sectors, residential and commercial energy and manufacturing and construction energy, so basically energy use emissions contribute to the largest chunk of emissions. So you get a fair bit of idea where actions need to be taken and what kind of actions need to be taken, right? Now we did the modeling of the future scenarios. This was done using curve tool, again a very data intensive exercise. We collected data, we consulted a lot of stakeholders at the city level, at the state level and at the national level on what the future policies can look like, what future programs and missions could look like at the local level, what is economically feasible for the city. Matlab, there can be a case where you speak with, say, a CEO of a smart city or a commissioner or a political leader, and they can say that I aspire for a 90% rooftop solar in my city in the next 10 years. But then if you speak with the technical head of the department, he would say that's not economically and financially possible. If you speak with a DISCOM, they would say, no, we cannot do this. What will I do with the coal generated power which I have if you install rooftop solar, right? And then, of course, how will you handle the variability? Because renewable power right now, it is variable in nature. What will you do in night? Do you have the storage capacity? Is there a battery storage or pump storage to that scale available? Does the city, if at all, it thinks that I can go for 90% rooftop solar with storage, does the city have the money to do that? If not, where can the money come from? So all these things, are possible to answer based on this analysis. So this was the first scenario. There's a business as usual scenario which I showed in my previous slide. This is the planned scenario. This is based on the current policies which are there. Now a city normally doesn't have a policy. The policy is at the state level and at the national level. Cities, are benefited by these policies at the 2 tiers. And then they have their own set of aspirations. So this scenario was created based on the existing policies at the national level, FAME 2 scheme, and the renewable purchase obligations and all those things. And then what are the policies or enabling provisions at the state level, etc. And what is the planning going on at the city level? So they must have entered into some tenders or floated some tenders to add certain capacity. So considering all those things, then there are comprehensive mobility plans which cities develop. What does that say as far as deploying electric buses is concerned, or transit oriented development, etc. So all those things for different sectors were incorporated in the existing and planned scenario. And what you can see is that as compared to the business as usual scenario, where the emissions were rising like this, there is a scope for Indore to reduce 40% of that emission. Now these are some of the things which are in pipeline, and based on this the existing and planned scenario was developed. So based on this, if you go to a local decision maker, city level decision maker or practitioner, and you show this to him that, sir / ma'am, this is possible based on the current plans which you have. So this will open their eyes, and this will lead to a sense of motivation that there is something additional which we can do, and this is that additional. This is the achievable scenario. Again, if you see, none of these two scenarios are leading to net zero, right? There is a significant gap remaining even in the aspirational or ambitious scenario. Ambitious scenario kya hai? When we say that in the existing and planned scenario where you have a target to deploy rooftop solar, say 30% of the buildings, both residential, commercial and municipal, will be rooftop solar by 2050. So based on, again, discussions, technical conversations, economic and financial conversations, if they are able to say with conviction that we can increase this target of 30% to say 45 or 50%, it is possible. Conditional, based on we get finance, we get this, we get that, private sector comes in, all those things. It is still possible to achieve 50% rooftop solar. Similarly for other sectors, then what will happen? In that case, Indore has the potential to go from this 40% reduction to 80%, which is huge for any city. If they are able to reduce 80% of their emissions by 2050, it will be a huge achievement. And then if you add up all these for especially the big cities, the 125, 130 smart cities, and then some other cities which are not smart, but then big cities, Amrut cities, etc., it all aggregates to a huge figure. So, and then, India has its obligations under the Paris Agreement. They have to, submit their progress on the NDCs before the next COP. The biennial transparency reports, all the parties have to submit to UNFCCC. That exercise is ongoing, where countries will need to show what is their progress on achieving the NDCs. If this kind of an exercise can happen and start, the BTRs can also be influenced and put India, or for that matter any other country, in that negotiating position. So this is the third scenario which can be developed out of this tool. And this is the breakup of the different activities which the city, in a very consultative and participative process, was able to come up with. That as far as the renewable energy generation is concerned, through rooftop solar and all those things, 60% of the conversions can be made, subject to availability of finance and private sector participation. Percentage of high income residential buildings with rooftop solar, 70%, municipal buildings 90%, Again, they were a bit skeptical in coming up with these targets. Otherwise, municipal buildings can be, why not 100%? Again, because of financial constraints and all those things. Cash flows are a major thing which cities are grappling with. Whatever revenue the city is able to generate, it is mostly being utilized for the recurring expenditure, the salaries, the fuels, all those things. So some of these targets are leading to the mitigation potential in the energy and buildings sector. If we look at the transport, most of the contribution is happening from passenger mode shift. So right now, switching the movement from private vehicles to public transport. That has the highest contribution. And then, of course, transit-oriented development and vehicle fuel switch. So these are some of the levers. Solid waste management, Indore is already doing a lot. There was a very less potential for reduction in emissions. But then, what Indore is not doing, there are a lot of things which can happen in Indore. For instance, they have STPs installed, the sewage treatment plants, but they are not capturing the gas, which is, being emitted, and that is methane. Methane is 21, 25 times more lethal as far as the global warming potential is concerned compared to carbon dioxide. So if they can also capture methane, it will have a significant impact on the waste sector emissions. And when we talk of wastewater, so again, there are these different technologies which can be deployed in Indore, which are currently not there. For example, again, non-revenue water, that is very high in Indore. So this is one discrepancy which we observed. The Climate Smart Cities data assessment framework, which I talked about initially, in that, Indore has submitted that they have an NRW of 20%. Now, as per the benchmarks of Ministry of Urban Development at the Government of India, the 15% benchmark is there for non-revenue water. And they said that in a phased manner in the coming 5-10 years, we'll reach this benchmark. But when we actually consulted the officers and the departments in the corporation, we got to know that it is currently 67%. 67% of the water is being lost through leakages or through, water is, when there's a supply through tankers, again, there are leakages, all those things, which is huge. And it has a huge implication on emissions, specifically for Indore, because as you might be aware, Indore is pumping water from 80 kilometers away from Omkareshwar, right? The Narmada, different phases of the Narmada project, they are pumping from 70-80 kilometers away, they are pumping it upward. There's an elevation difference between Omkareshwar and Indore. So huge energy costs on one hand, huge emissions because that energy is coming from a grid which is not decarbonized, which is not green. So, again, a huge potential for reducing emissions. So based on this analysis, what we get to know is what are some of the areas which have the highest mitigation potential. Again, grid decarbonization is the first and foremost, because when we saw the first bar chart, we got to know that energy related emissions are the highest. And how can you reduce those emissions? If you decarbonize your grid. Solar PV in residential, commercial and municipal buildings, passenger mode shift, etc. These were the major things which we have observed in this slide till now. This is a slide shows a glimpse of what the national level targets look like based on the national analysis which we did, which I have not shown. If you recall the first slide, I said that this same thing has been done at the national level based on another model which WRI India has developed, the Energy Policy Simulator model. In that, there is a long-term decarbonization scenario supporting the India's 2070 net zero target. In that, there are these kind of targets which, if adopted, would lead to net zero 2070. As compared with that, if you see, for a few, there is a huge potential to shift. Four-wheelers, India can take a target of 53% for achieving net zero. Indore 96%, Ujjain 80%, Surat 80%, Mumbai 96%. Why? The reason is that this is a very granular scale. If you want to, shift these from conventional to electric vehicles, there has to be, these, especially at the city level, it is also driven largely by consumer choices. As we are able to see, there are subsidies and enabling provisions coming up. So with these, these consumer choices are also being altered, and there are renewables which are being promoted a lot. But when we talk of the national level, there is a huge rural and suburban sector which is there, which cannot be, is not that easy to push, to move or switch towards cleaner fuels. If we talk of buses, again at the national level it's 43%, because that also includes a major part of rural and semi-urban. But in cities it is possible, supported by, of course, a push towards public transport, behavioral shifts, transit-oriented development, provision of non-motorized transport, all these things. What are some of the challenges and learnings which the cities can face while doing this analysis, or can learn from these analyses? There's a very limited data availability. So what needs to be done? Either city authorities can collaborate with academic institutions, with local think tanks, local civil society organizations, to have a repository of data. Data right now, again, it is being collected and stored in a very ad hoc fashion. That also, again, there's a challenge that cities, the ULBs are a service delivery agency. They are not a planning and implementing agency, right? So they maintain that kind of data. And we, as academicians, as think tanks, have a responsibility to not further impose these kind of principles on them, that this is not the correct way. You should also have all these data sets which you should maintain, because that is not their mandate. They are already overburdened. So what can be done practically to support them is partnerships. They should partner with different institutions, which is now gradually picking up. A lot of city authorities are partnering, are valuing these partnerships, and then utilizing the data or the analysis. So data, of course, is one, and then capacity building on why this data is important, what you should do with this data, etc. So capacity building is also an important aspect. The second major challenge is synergies within city and within multiple governance levels. Within a city, we understand there are different departments, same as at the state level, same as at the national level, who do not converse with each other. So it is the responsibility of the leadership or the decision making authority at the city level to bring all of them together, to break these silos. There is a comprehensive mobility plan which a city is developing. But is that comprehensive mobility plan also informing the master plan? If not, that is a big challenge. That shouldn't happen. So if there is a master plan being developed, is it being informed by the future demand and supply planning of the Water Resources Department? Because where will the supply come from? And if at all there are new developments which are proposed within the city. So there has to be a synergy, there has to be collaboration, and leadership is extremely important. And last, choosing the right tool. This is what I wanted to come to when I was talking about pathways and curve. So both these tools, what we observed while working on these was that they are not that suited to Indian conditions. In India, in Europe, if you put these tools to practice, they have all the data sets which are required for these tools. there are Excel sheets, and they have all those fields. The units which are there, they are not suited for Indian conditions. The emission factors are not Indian. So everything has to be customized. Will the cities have the capacity to do that? No, they won't. Here also partnerships becomes important. And again, limitations of the tool in terms of usability, in terms of restrictions, etc. What we did after this exercise, when we observed that these tools are not, we found it very difficult to work with them. How can we expect cities to do that? And these are not, the tier 1 cities we are talking about. These are Amrut cities now, where the action needs to happen and it has to aggregate. What we are doing is we are developing a tool suited for Indian conditions. It's still in pilot stage. All the formula and everything have been entered. The user interface is ready. We are now pilot testing it across different geographies to validate it. So tools, choosing the right tool, and then building the capacity of the local stakeholders, not just government, but also think tanks, academic institutions, CSOs, etc., on how to use this tool so that they are actually present at the local level. They can support the local governments. So these are the challenges and learnings which come out from this exercise. And specifically when we talk of capacity building, what is required, and all this is happening now. Each of these are happening. Climate cell. It is very important that the cities should now start thinking of developing climate cells, formulating climate cells. In Bombay, based on our work, extensive work in Mumbai, we have developed the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, and we have been engaged with them since the past 5-6 years. They have constituted this climate cell. There is a dedicated, climate adaptation officer, climate mitigation officer, and then technical experts who are now being hired. Again, they are offering a fellowship, so that interested people can come in, join, contribute, and then learn and go back. So all these things are happening. It's very necessary to have an institutional framework at the city level which talks about climate change, which understands these issues. There's an institutional memory which needs to be created so that climate actions can be planned and implemented. City level data dashboards, this again comes from the earlier slide. If there can be a dashboard, like we have open data portal, data.gov, people should also have the functionality to submit the data which can be vetted and then hosted on this dashboard. All departments should have access to it. Whatever new they are doing or whatever new is happening, it can be fed into this dashboard, which can be used by anybody for analysis or for planning. Dynamic city level plans. Why do I say dynamic? Because again, what happens is if a city level plan or a state level plan is developed or formulated, it remains a static document. But circumstances change. Emissions are changing on a daily basis. So these plans, whatever they recommend, whatever they suggest, will also change. Today, there might not be a need, say in a city from Himachal Pradesh to focus on cooling. But maybe a decade after, cooling might become a substantial issue for them as well. So, there has to be a dynamic nature of these city level climate action plans. Monitoring, reporting and verification frameworks. It's always important to have a feedback mechanism. If you want to ensure that your plans are dynamic in nature, you need to measure what you are implementing. You need to measure the progress, or if the progress is not happening, so that it can give a feedback. And climate budget, where will the finance come from? Again, Mumbai is the first city to formulate a climate budget. What it does is that there is a budget of the corporation which comes up, which is placed in the mayor and council. In that, they identify which of these scheme codes in the budget are relevant to climate action and to what extent. Is there a possibility to increase allocation to these codes which are relevant from the climate action perspective and reduce the allocation from some of those which are not or which are not that important. So basically, a city gets an understanding of what is the public money available with it for implementing climate actions and how it can leverage that public money to raise in more private capital. So, as we said, climate action is possible only if private sector will come in, especially for countries like India. There is a huge requirement of climate finance which the government doesn't have the resources for. Private sector has to come in. Now, what kind of instruments will that be? Will there be an equity consideration in that? Will it be debt? Will it be a complete grant? Maybe philanthropies and CSRs can come in. So what can be that? That is possible if the city has a climate budget, because this gives confidence to the private sector, the philanthropies and investors, that the city is serious about climate action implementation and it is worthwhile to invest over here. Right? Yeah.
There is a lot of contradictions on the climate budget and budget allocated for the development of the city.
Yeah.
So the budget making agencies could not come to a conclusion how they should move, taking together all these things. So what is the way forward for these?
So the challenge again is capacity related. There are methodologies for doing the climate budget tagging. Now it is tagging, what I am saying, right? After the tagging, budget allocation will happen. What is tagging? As I said, there is a scheme code, say water supply. There is a scheme code for that. The corporation allocates 1,000 crores for that every year, right? Now we understand that water supply has a strong adaptation relevance. If you cut water, the population will lose its adaptive capacity. So you can, attach a high relevance to this particular code. Then there might be another code which says allocation of 500 crores for the current financial year for procuring diesel to operate the solid waste management fleet in the city. Now, this might be a low relevant or not at all relevant, right? So what the city can do is, if I can cut down this 500 crore to say 200 crore, move the 300 crore to other scheme codes which have a high relevance from the climate perspective, and यहाँ पे जो this reduction which has happened, I deploy electric, vehicles for solid waste management. There will be a capex, right? That we can manage. Say for the current year, we don't allocate this 300 crore. We use this 300 crore to get in these electric vehicles. From next year, we'll move this budget to that budget. But do the cities have an understanding of these kind of methodologies? No. So what we are doing in Mumbai, we extensively supported them for the first round of climate budget and building their capacities at the same time.
For these things, climate cell can be a very important.
Yes, yes.
They will advise them how to channelize the.
And the climate cell, the constitution of the climate cell, there will be of course technical people, but then it will have representation from all these departments, so that no one is left behind. All their views are there, and then there are technical people from the climate perspective who can suggest or advise that this is the alternate way in which it can be done, which will have more benefits rather than costs. So climate cell is the starting point.
So what you suggest that the climate budget percentage in the overall project total budget scenario, like that you are talking about the 500 crores any sewage and water supply and solid waste management, such type of project, that special purpose vehicle state government has created. So how much percentage should the neck to neck or bottom line should be?
So there is no, I mean, it will be specific to every city. You cannot set a benchmark. For instance, we are working in Bihar. We have developed their long-term net zero strategy for all the sectors. Again, in intensive modeling exercise and engagement. Now we are engaged with them for finance, securing climate finance. And the first exercise which we are doing is this climate budget tagging, so that we know where the state stands. Now for a state like Bihar, which is disaster prone, which has very little potential to expand on renewable energy because it remains either flooded or submerged, 50%, more than 50% of the state, the entire northern Bihar remains submerged for 6 to 8 months. And the southern part is drought prone, right? So with such unique challenges, they have around 10 to 12% of their annual budget as green budget. Now they are, taking conscious decision to increase it in a phased manner. How? Again, reducing allocations from the non-important scheme codes to these important scheme codes. For a city like Mumbai, when we did the first climate budget tagging exercise, they have a climate budget of around 18%, 1/8. Right, so it's different for different cities based on what they are currently doing, what is the priority for them, and what should be the priority for them. For some cities, water might emerge as the main priority, not renewables or these things, because they do not. For a city like Ujjain, say, very small population, very short distances, why would people prefer switching to public transport? If they have to travel 2 kilometers, there is no transit-oriented development, there is no last-mile connectivity, they will prefer to use their own vehicles. So these will not be economically feasible options for a city like Ujjain, unlike Mumbai, right? So they have to prioritize. Now what this exercise does enable you is identify those priority areas which are, economically viable for me. And then you start allocating budgets and reducing from those which are non-priority. And through this exercise, you can also set accountability. That in government, progress is measured in 2 ways. 1, how much spending you have done. 2, how much physical target achievement you have done. So if you have a target for both spending and physical, then your accountability will be set in that way. Are you able to spend? Now earlier it was 500, now it is 800. Are you able to spend 800 crores? If not, then it will reduce in the next iteration, or you will be given a token cut in the budget. But then if you are able to do that, then you can ask for more. And eventually what is happening is this money is being spent for actual infrastructure creation, which is leading to building the resilience or reducing the emissions. Right. So this is where, so this was a mitigation related analysis. When you talk about equity and social considerations and justice, that comes in the other part, the adaptation and resilience part, where you have to identify which pockets are vulnerable in the city. So which wards or which zones are vulnerable or particularly vulnerable due to which impacts. Right, there might be, an area which is very vulnerable or identified as a hotspot from the heat perspective. For instance, if we talk about Bhopal, say, this is hypothetical, E1, E2 Arera colony, they are identified through this analysis as hotspots for heat-related impacts. But is it really vulnerable? Is the population that vulnerable? No, they are economically very well off. On the other hand, there might be a case that E1, E2 Arera colony might be identified as a hotspot because they are witnessing a temperature rise of, say, or 1.2 degrees Celsius, while a slum might be witnessing a temperature rise of, say, 0.6, 0.7 degrees Celsius, because of which it was not identified as a hotspot. right? But then they are vulnerable, they do not have the adaptive capacities. So where will you prioritize action? So this is the hotspot mapping, vulnerability and risk assessments, and then planning for those kind of things. Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, what it does is, as I said, the top two or three themes, they are mitigation oriented. The only theme, water and green cover, biodiversity and urban planning, that is what looks at both. So green spaces, blue spaces, how should the city develop, and all these things are in one thematic area. Water, so reduction in non-revenue water and efficiency in water pumping and water supply, etc. That again has energy related implications. But then these are the two sectors, so very limited in scope. But when I'm saying this climate cell, they need to have these kind of experts. There has to be a gender expert, there has to be a social safeguard specialist. At the national level, there is a program called CITIS, CITIIS, City Investments to Innovate, Integrate and Sustain. Mahua is anchoring that program. We were a part of the design of that program. So there was a consortium, WRI India. It is funded by European Union, AFD, which is the French funding arm, and the KfW, which is the German bank. So these three are the funding, and then there is a Government of India contribution as well. They provide support to the cities and the states. That again driven by a challenge process. They invite proposals and then select. But in that, they have these gender experts or specialists, social safeguard specialists, ESG specialists. All these are there at the national level, and also a requirement for cities to engage these kind of experts or specialists if they are selected for the challenge. Because there is a funding grant support of 100 to 125 crore rupees which will be given to cities. So they have to ensure that these implications are addressed in the project implementation. So there are things which are being discussed, which are being done. Again, how much awareness is there is the challenge. At the city level, it's very, varied, I would say. I won't say it's not at all there, it's varied. This is where partnerships and engagements are important.
Just a last one, you mentioned that in Indore, on the sector of waste management, they are not doing much.
No, they are doing a lot. I said they are doing a lot. But then there is also a scope, though it is very limited as compared with other sectors. When we looked at the emissions, the pie chart, as compared with other sectors, and in the overall kitty, solid waste management is just 1%. Wastewater is around 8 to 10%. Again, why wastewater is 8 to 10%? Because of the gas not being captured in the STPs. There is scope, but very limited, because Indore is already doing a lot in waste management.
That is what I'm
Yeah.
So under smart city mission, integrated credit, carbon credit market also, they are the leaders.
Yes.
So is WRI is working with, is anyways engaged with them, or is?
So we are working with Indore since a long time. Right now, the priority for Indore is air quality. So we are working on apportionment studies and identifying again sources and hotspots and fuel switching in the MSME sector, or energy efficiencies or adoption of new technologies. So these are some of the areas where we are working with Indore. Okay, thank you so much. It was a pleasure interacting with you all, and ma'am has my contact details. Ma'am, you can share with them. Anytime you need any kind of clarifications or support, I would be happy to.
I think there are many questions, but due to time limitation, we are approaching you here.
Sure. Thank you so much.
I would now request Dr. Surya Niratra to felicitate Mr. Saransh Vajpayee with the certificate as a token of appreciation and gratitude for delivering this talk.
Thank you, sir. This is.
Thank you so much.
अच्छा, तो